Saturday, October 9th, 2021, 5:40 a.m., room 309, SOHO Boutique Hotel, Tak City, Thailand. I had a great day yesterday, though not precisely the day I expected. After some confusion and effort, I did manage to locate both the Petrified Wood Forest Park and the Flintstones-themed coffee shop, but both were closed. Oddly enough, Brett went to the Petrified Wood Forest Park just a couple of weeks ago, and it was open for him. But I watched the opening part of his video, and I'm pretty sure that he just got lucky. When I showed up at the gate, the barricade was partially raised, just as it was for Brett. Physically, I could have ridden under it and into the national park, but there were soldiers there, and one of them came to stop me and tell me that the park was closed. When Brett rode up to this raised barricade, there were no soldiers around, so he just rode past and went to see the park. I think the park was technically closed even at that time, but the soldiers were taking a break when Brett appeared and he wasn't stopped. At the Flintstones coffee shop, I was able to ride my scooter into the parking lot and take pictures of all the statues of Fred and Wilma and Betty and Barney and Pebbles and Bam Bam and Dino, but the coffee shop itself was closed. I just took pictures and left. While there, I spoke with a man and he asked me where I had come from and where I was going. In my answer, I mentioned Moosa, and his eyes widened in shock. He even called over to a woman, who I assume was his mother, and he told her what I had said. They both chatted in concern for a minute, and then the man said to me in English something like, "Moosa, very danger, COVID." Apparently, Moosa has the reputation of a dangerous place to be. Leaving my hotel in Sam Nhau was relatively effortless. Since I didn't anticipate a long day, I had made no attempt to leave super early. I took my time with my morning coffees and packing. This meant that I was able to collect my 100 baht room key deposit. The last time I stayed at this hotel, I had to leave a 100 baht deposit for the key, but I left so early the next morning that it wasn't possible to get it back. No one was awake yet. And there is no office at this hotel. It's owned and run by a family that just lives in one of the rooms like everyone else. I talked about this on my video that day, and I commented on how I always end up losing room key deposits when I stay at hotels that require one. I generally leave too early in the morning to ever get it back. But this time, I was leaving so late that there was lots of activity over at the room where the owners or managers lived. Once my scooter was fully packed and ready to go, I strolled over to return the key and I got the deposit back. The wife of this husband and wife team speaks a bit of English, and she asked me about my plans. She seemed surprised that I was in Sam Nhau at all, and she wanted to know why I was there. It didn't appear to make sense to her that this small town would be appealing to me as a tourist attraction. She also told me that her mother had seen me all over the town taking pictures, and she wanted to know what that was all about. This conversation drove home again that as a foreigner in a town like this, you don't go unnoticed. Everything you do will be noted by someone, and the story will spread through the town like wildfire. Everyone will quickly know who you are and everything you've done. It's a good reminder to be on your best behavior. All was not totally smooth with my departure, however. One of the last things I needed to do to get ready was to attach my GoPro to the Jaws Flex clamp, which was in turn attached to the scooter grip. Not long ago, I bought a special mount from a company called Ram Mounts to do precisely this. This company makes heavy-duty and very good mounting systems for action cameras, smartphones, tablets, laptops, and GPS devices. But as I slid the GoPro quick release buckle into position, one of the two locking arms snapped off. That was so annoying. My heavy-duty and somewhat expensive mount hadn't lasted very long. I didn't have anything in my bag of tricks that was able to fix it, so I ended up simply holding the GoPro in place with a bunch of twisted gardening wire. And that meant I no longer had the quick release capability. The GoPro was now wired into position permanently, and I would have to undo the entire wire assembly every time I wanted to remove the GoPro from the scooter. That was very annoying. My plan for the day was to ride to TACT along the large and busy Highway 1. I wasn't pleased about that, but it was necessary in order to visit the park and the coffee shop. By the time I discovered that both the park and the coffee shop were closed, I have to admit that I was going a bit out of my mind from the roar of the traffic. At the side of one of those major highways is not a place where humans are meant to live. The noise is oppressive and overwhelming. And this was compounded by the frequency with which I had to stop to service my GoPro or otherwise fiddle around with technology. It was a bit much, I have to admit, even for me. It felt like every 10 minutes I had to pull over to the side of the highway to work on something. The GoPro overheated and shut down repeatedly. The memory card filled up and had to be replaced. The battery died and had to be replaced twice. The gardening wire holding the GoPro in place seemed to come loose twice, and I had to stop to adjust it and tighten it. And while I worked on these various issues, the massive trucks roared past just feet away and created a world of sound that seemed to be beating me around the head. It's an oppressive and hostile world to inhabit while dealing with the fidgety details of opening up camera bags and getting out tiny micro SD cards. And all of this was taking place while the sun was roasting me alive. It was not a good time. Luckily, after I passed the Flintstones coffee shop, I was free to leave the highway, and I did so at the earliest opportunity. I found a small road that led down to the shore of the nearby Ping River. I was only a few kilometers away from Tak City by this point, but I was very happy to complete the trip in the peace and quiet of that small road, far away from the highway. However, even that trip wasn't easy. There was a lot of construction going on somewhere in that area, and large sand and gravel trucks went past regularly and filled the air with stinging dust that found its way into my eyes and throat. Meanwhile, the sun continued to beat down. One could almost yearn for the cooler conditions of the rainy season that finally appeared to be coming to an end. I'd heard that Tak City was spread out over a long distance, and it did strike me that way as I rode along the river. I appeared to enter city limits a long, long way from the actual center of town where my hotel was located. I'm pretty sure this was a historical result of the town being beside the river. Houses and businesses just naturally spread out alongside the river, like long tentacles of human habitation, stretching out into the countryside until the city became stretched out and elongated. I arrived in Tak City around 12:30, which was too early to check in at my hotel. Considering they probably have low occupancy, chances are I could have checked in before the official 2 p.m. check-in time. A room would probably have been ready, but I decided to hang out and wait until 2. It was a good chance to visit the King Taksin the Great Memorial Shrine, which, along with the pedestrian bridge, are the two major attractions of the city. I thought that since both the Petrified Tree Park and the Flintstones coffee shop were a bust, it would be nice to fold a new attraction into my day. As it turned out, I was glad I did this. The shrine was much larger and more elaborate than I expected. I honestly expected to find little more than a statue on a street corner or in the center of a roundabout. I knew King Thaksin was revered in Thailand as a national hero, but the scale and tone of this shrine came as a complete surprise. It was a large and beautifully landscaped park filled with all manner of attractions. The focal point for the park was a building containing a statue of King Thaksin, and the activity there was identical to what you would see at a Buddhist shrine. People prayed to the statue and left offerings and performed divining rituals. This surprised me because I thought of King Thaksin as a figure of history. He was considered a great man and a great ruler, but he was still just a man. He was a king and a military leader, and his story would be in the history books. He was not a religious figure to be worshipped and prayed to, but over time he had been transformed into such a figure, and his statue was treated with the same reverence as a religious statue. I don't have the exact details of the life of King Thaksin at my mental fingertips. In fact, once you get into the history of Thailand and all the names of the various kingdoms start popping up, I quickly lose track and get lost. However, King Thaksin was instrumental in defeating an invading Burmese army in the 18th century, and he is admired for that. As king, he was involved in various wars and military campaigns for his entire reign. However, he was also something of a Renaissance ruler, and he focused on improving the road system and other public works, on building schools and education systems, and promoting the arts. All of this work came together to make him a special figure in the history of Thailand, and people appear to come from all over the country to visit this shrine. One of the first things I saw from my scooter as I rode up to this park was a large fountain filled with about 6 or 8 full-size statues of black stallions. And there was another large area filled with other statues of war horses, soldiers, and cannons. Based on how all of these were of random sizes and styles, I assumed they were donated by individuals and companies. Near this irregular army was a vast square of hundreds, maybe thousands of rooster statues. Behind that was a similar area filled with small statues of elephants and horses. These were all arrayed by size, from smallest at the front to largest at the back. It was quite the sight, and I tried to get fancy with my Pocket 2 camera by zooming the lens right over the heads of this menagerie. I was using the Pocket 2 because the GoPro had overheated and shut down again just as I arrived at the shrine. On the highway coming toward Tak, I passed multiple shops at the side of the road selling statues like the ones I saw at the shrine. I wondered if all these stores sprang up solely to sell statues for this shrine. That seemed unlikely, though. There were far too many of these businesses for just this one shrine. In fact, now that I think back, I remember being surprised at how many temples were located along the river as I rode into Tak. I passed what felt like dozens of large temples, more than I would expect to find in a town of this size. Perhaps Tak is known as a city of temples, and the shops outside the city do a roaring trade in selling statuary to visitors coming to worship at these temples. After my visit to the King Thaksin the Great Memorial Shrine, I still had time before the official check-in time at the hotel. I remembered seeing some kind of coffee shop at the parking lot for the shrine, and I made my way back there to check it out. From the outside, and definitely from the inside, it was not my kind of place. It was a pink and frilly kind of cafe, selling fancy, sugary concoctions involving lots of ice cream, chocolate, and shiny, colorful sprinkles. It's the kind of place that makes my teeth hurt just looking at it. But I was in no mood to go wandering around the city in that heat to find a more suitable place. With some trepidation, I made my way over to this pink, frosty place and looked for the door. I say that I looked for the door because it wasn't totally obvious where it was. It turned out that the door itself was disguised as a kind of children's vending machine dispensing prizes. It was a hidden door. I might never have discovered it on my own, but a person on the inside just happened to be leaving, and this vending machine opened up while I was standing there, and as it swung to the side, it revealed the doorway into the interior. I was hesitant to enter. I'm always hesitant these days because everything is always closed, and I dislike being rejected. I always feel like I have done something wrong when I try to go to a place and then am turned away. I hate making mistakes. I fully assumed that as I tried to enter this sweets emporium, I would be turned away in horror. But it was open, and I was allowed to go inside and take a seat. This was clearly not a place for a giant, sweaty, disheveled man such as I was at that time. This was a place for dainty girls and young mothers and their young children. I had the impression of being inside a pink cake filled with pillows, flowers, knickknacks, and teddy bears. My intention was to order a manly coffee, but when faced with the colorful interior and the displays of ice cream and sweets, I felt a coffee order would be a disappointment to the owners. I decided to look over their ordering menu and see if I could order something that would allow them to put their best foot forward and serve me something that they specialize in and are proud of. Unfortunately, when I sat down at a small table and did my best to get comfortable, I discovered that the menu was almost entirely in Thai. It did not really help me in making a suitable choice. The sections of the menu did have English words as part of the title, and I focused on the section that read smoothies. I thought a smoothie would be a good compromise between my desires and the things they could make. I brought the menu back up to the counter and I pointed to the word smoothie. The woman responded with the English question, "Strawberry?" I actually am not a big fan of strawberry-flavored smoothies and ice cream. It is always far too sweet and syrupy. But I was in the mood to follow the path of least resistance, and I simply agreed to whatever she suggested. And after a few minutes, a garish strawberry smoothie showed up at my table. It was pink, as no drink has the right to be, and the top was covered in brightly colored marshmallows and flowers and sprinkles. It was a sight. And then, for reasons I don't understand, I felt like I should order something else. It felt insufficient to order just this drink and leave. And, by this point, I discovered that in addition to the paper menu you use to place your order, they also had regular and very large menus complete with photographs of all their dishes. And I took these giant books back to my table to look them over. I was curious about all the things they made. And then I spent so long going over these menus that it would have felt weird to order nothing. It would have seemed like I was rejecting their offerings. I was only looking at the menus out of vague interest. I was treating them like reading material. But the owners of this sweets cafe didn't know that. They would assume that I was looking for something to order. And if I didn't order anything, they would assume that I didn't like what they made. It is difficult living inside my brain. I overthink just about everything. In the end, I settled on a tasty-looking brownie with ice cream and chocolate sauce. But even then, I was hesitant. When I place an order in a restaurant, I tend to be hesitant. I'm hesitant because I'm worried that they won't actually have the item I've chosen, and that often turns out to be the case. And then I worry that I've made them feel bad by ordering something that they can't make. They have to apologize. And that's exactly what happened in this case. I pointed hesitantly at the picture of the brownie, and the woman smiled guiltily and shook her head no. They didn't have any brownies. And now we ended up in this weird situation where she started flipping through the menu to locate items that they could make. And there seemed to be very few of these. I could have chosen items from this menu for 20 minutes, only to be told each time that that order was not possible. By this point, I simply wanted the ordeal to be over, and I agreed with the very next thing she pointed at. And this was something called a crunchy chocolate sundae. It was actually a good choice. I can enjoy a couple of scoops of chocolate ice cream just as much as the next man. And from the photograph, it looked like the brightly colored sprinkles and decorations would be kept to a minimum. So, finally, I found myself in the very strange position of consuming a strawberry smoothie and a chocolate sundae at the King Taksin the Great Memorial Shrine. By the time I was done, it was after 2 o'clock, and I hopped on my scooter and rode the short distance to the SOHO Boutique Hotel. Things at the SOHO went delightfully smoothly. The reservation made by my mystery benefactor was accepted without question. All I needed to do was hand over my passport to confirm my identity and then fill out a simple form with my phone number and a signature. And that was it. I was handed an electronic key card for room 309 and I was free to go. They did not require a deposit. They did not ask me to sign several affidavits confirming that I would behave myself and not destroy their property. And they did not make me sign forms declaring the array of financial penalties I would have to pay if any items in my room were damaged or went missing. I was not even required to fill out a COVID-19 tracking and tracing form detailing my movements and addresses. I felt welcome at the SOHO. The room, of course, is fantastic. It is large and contains not only the things I want and need, but many other things besides. The bed is quite large and extremely comfortable. The towels have been folded into the shape of swans, forming a heart with their long necks. The room has a closet that is almost as large as some entire single rooms I have stayed in at budget guest houses in my life. I could sleep inside that closet comfortably. The room has not one, but 2 long counters. At one counter, there is a kitchen-style chair with a nice backrest. That is always welcome. It surprises me how many relatively upscale hotel rooms won't have any chairs at all. I like to have a chair. There is a mini fridge, of course, and a kettle, plus all the usual complimentary soaps, shampoos, toothbrushes, instant coffee packets, and bottles of water. Best of all, there are 2 coffee mugs, and these are actual coffee mugs. They're not dainty teacups. These are big, manly coffee mugs that can hold oceans of coffee. I love those. One of the reasons I pack my own Tim Hortons coffee cup everywhere I go is because the usual cups that hotels supply are far too small. And the coffee mug at the SOHO puts even my Tim Hortons mug to shame. I haven't done a comparison or test, but I think this SOHO mug could hold nearly twice as much liquid as my Timmy mug. I have to admit that I was a bit of a wreck by this point. It really hadn't been a long or difficult day, but I guess I have turned into a wimp. I had been beaten down and exhausted by the sun and the roar of the highway. I was already exhausted when I was at the shrine and the sweets cafe. And as much as I was enjoying the process of checking into this nice room and unpacking and getting settled, I was stumbling around and barely able to concentrate. I did all of this in stages. When I first arrived, I left my big backpack strapped to my scooter. I went inside the hotel to check in carrying just my knapsack. I brought that up to my room, and then I had to go back down to get my backpack and the large jug of water I had in the helmet compartment. I brought those up to my room, and then I had to go back down again to move my scooter away from the front entrance and to the official parking area. And then I had to do the official documenting. I was still running the Relive app, and I wanted to take pictures of my arrival in order to include them in the final map. To my dismay, I realized that I had paused the app at the shrine, and then I had forgotten to resume it when I left. So I thought the final portion of my trip wouldn't have been recorded. But it appears that the app was able to recreate it even though it wasn't officially recording at the time. In order to officially end the activity, I had to connect my phones to the hotel Wi-Fi. I was pleased to find out that no password was required for the SOHO Wi-Fi network. I thought that was a logical and wise decision on their part. I don't really understand why hotels have complex passwords these days anyway. What's the point anymore? And once I was connected, I was able to finalize the Relive activity. And that involved choosing a title for the activity, selecting the photos I wanted to include, and writing little captions for the photographs. I completed that, and then I was free to roam around the hotel. I always go out and explore a little bit as soon as I arrive. My main goal is to go up as high as I can and look at the views over the city. I rode the elevator up to the top floor, which was the 7th floor, but it was not open. When the elevator door opened, I was faced with a steel security grate that would not open. Then I went back down to the 6th, where I was able to go to the doors at the fire exit at both ends and go out onto a balcony to look out over the city and take some pictures. When I did this, my life almost ended, literally. I didn't see it until it was almost too late, but the floor at my feet was an open square to make room for the fire escape ladder. I hadn't seen this opening at all, and only at the last second did I stop myself from stepping right into it. Looking down into that opening and contemplating the drop, it was clear that surviving that fall would be solely a matter of chance. I might have lived. I might not have. But without question, I would have been hospitalized in critical condition with multiple broken bones and internal bleeding. I pondered that opening for a while, and I wondered at its nature. I understand that fire regulations would prevent the setting up of actual barriers to this precipitous fire escape plunge. But I couldn't help but feel that a bright yellow ribbon wouldn't have gone amiss. Then again, I was clearly quite tired and not thinking straight, and I was viewing the world through a camera. That's probably why I didn't even see the opening on the floor. I spent mid-afternoon in this wonderful room, enjoying some instant coffee while lounging on this comfy bed. But when sunset time started to roll around and the sun was lower in the sky, I decided to go outside and check out the pedestrian bridge. To be honest, I was too tired to really do that. I was more in the mood to just stay indoors. I'd had enough of the outside world for one day. But I would only be in TAC for 2 nights and 1 full day, and the pedestrian bridge was very near the hotel. I felt that since I had already visited the famous shrine, I might as well visit the famous pedestrian bridge. At the very least, I could treat it as a chance to further test my Pocket 2 camera. So I got ready and I sailed out the door to walk to the bridge. I was clearly not in the best condition. I found the chaotic traffic difficult to navigate. I was feeling a bit overwhelmed by it all, but I managed to not get run over as I made my way down to the bridge. This was a Friday night, and lots of market stalls were being set up along the main roads near the river. It was a good opportunity for a night of snacking, but I knew I didn't have the energy for it. After my trip to the bridge, I did walk along the main streets and film some of the market activity, and I picked up some chicken and rice and veggies to eat back in my room for dinner. But that was as far as my experience of the riverside nightlife went. I figured I could go back the next night, Saturday night, which is tonight. To my surprise, I enjoyed my visit to the bridge very much, and I was glad I made the effort to go. It was casual fun. The bridge itself is surprisingly long. It is a true pedestrian bridge, and there are no cars or trucks or motorcycles at all. That fact alone made walking across it a delightful experience. When else in Thailand are you ever free of the roar of traffic? And the noise and heat of Tak City proper faded away as I walked out over this slender, bouncing suspension bridge. A gentle breeze picked up as I walked farther and farther out over the river. The sun was lowering in the sky to the west over the mountains and casting a dramatic tone over the whole scene. I loved being out there. And the bridge appeared to have the same effect on everyone else. There were a number of local people walking across the bridge, and they were clearly out there simply to enjoy the scene as I was. This bridge didn't actually go anywhere useful for most people. It was not meant as a transportation corridor. It was meant for leisure, and people had come in their exercise clothes and were busy stretching and waving their arms. And this change in tone meant that people smiled at me and waved hello, and we all greeted each other as we passed. A man rolling along a bicycle stopped to chat with me, and he asked me if the video I was shooting would be on YouTube, and he asked me for my channel's name. I had lots of friendly encounters with people, and that was kind of a rare experience. I started to feel very fond of this town of Tak. Sunday, October 10th, 2021, 4:45 a.m., room 309, SOHO Boutique Hotel, Tak City, Thailand. My time in Tak is coming to an end. I'm sad about that. I'm particularly sad about leaving this room at the SOHO. I've settled in quite nicely, and that is why I am, once again, awake so early. I want to maximize my enjoyment of this room, and I wanted to be awake and busy for a few hours before breakfast time and my return to Moosa. My one big complaint is that there has been little to no internet access. The Wi-Fi signal is strong, and I'm always connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi, but it rarely provides access to the internet. And without the internet, I feel as though one or two of my limbs have been cut off. It doesn't make sense that they would have such a policy, but it seems like they turn off internet access for much of the day and the night. I noticed that on my first morning, the internet reappeared at exactly 7 a.m., as if on a schedule. All last night, there was no internet access, and the internet continues to be absent now that I'm awake and out of bed. It will be interesting to see if it suddenly appears at 7 a.m. again. The highlight of yesterday was the breakfast. There had been some confusion upon check-in about exactly where the hotel's breakfast was served, and I never quite understood what they were telling me. And the confusion continued yesterday morning as I was unable to locate any kind of breakfast buffet anywhere. I finally returned to the front desk, and though I still didn't really understand what I was being told, I got the idea that this breakfast wasn't served inside the hotel at all, but at a nearby restaurant, and that turned out to be the case. The restaurant was called the Awake Owl, and it was located on the street beside the entrance driveway to the SOHO. No one had told me this, but I had been assuming that this would be a breakfast buffet from which you served yourself. But that wasn't how it worked. There was a self-serve area where you could get toast and coffee, but for the breakfast itself, you were served as at a normal restaurant. I sat down at a table and looked over a menu, and when I had made my choices, I went over to the counter and placed my order, and a server brought the food to my table. I really liked the Awake Owl. The seating was comfortable, though open to the outside world, and that meant that the noise of Thailand's tens of billions of angle grinders wafted over me as I ate. One is never far away from an angle grinder in Southeast Asia. But I liked the happy decor of the Awake Owl. The walls were covered in large paintings of various owls with comically large eyes and perky expressions. These awake owls had clearly just consumed about 10 cups of coffee each, and they were very much awake. I was in a great mood, and I set up my Pocket 2 camera on the table and chatted into the lens as I enjoyed my breakfast and then a cup of coffee. The morning continues to be my time. The evening and night is wasted on me, but I love a good morning. That is when I feel my best. I passed most of the day inside my room at the SOHO. I had lots of YouTube-related projects on the go, and I devoted most of the hours of the day to that endeavor. The plan was to emerge from my gloriously comfortable room once the sun had lowered in the sky. It was a Saturday, and my plan was to go back to the pedestrian bridge and then snack my way along the riverside market. I was going to bring one of my various cameras and film the experience. I was partially successful in this. I did go back to the bridge and then go snacking along the river, and I did bring a camera, but the actual filming didn't happen. At least I didn't end up with a full video record of the activities. I filmed much of the beginning of the evening, but it eventually became too much to deal with. I was far too tired. It was far too hot. The streets and the market were far too crowded and chaotic. I was dripping with sweat and unable to handle the camera and order snacks and then hold the snacks and eat them while operating a camera at the same time and talking about the experience. In the past, I dealt with this situation by adopting squirrel behavior. I'd get my snacks one at a time, and then I'd run away with my snack until I found a spot where I could sit in relative comfort and attach my camera to a convenient post or garbage container or fence. This often put me in relatively dirty and cramped and weird places, but it was the best I could do. There is rarely anywhere to sit down. And when I finished that snack, I'd go back into the fray, buy another snack, and then find another secluded spot to enjoy them. I was a squirrel grabbing a peanut and then running away to consume it or bury it in safety somewhere else, and then coming back for a second peanut. But this particular street market felt challenging from that point of view. The stalls were not arrayed on the river side of the busy street. They were arrayed along the sidewalk on the other side of that very busy road on the opposite side of the river. It would have been nice to grab a snack and then sit on a bench near the river to enjoy it. But that wasn't really possible. I could barely make it across that busy street just twice to go to the pedestrian bridge and back again. To make that difficult crossing multiple times with different snacks seemed far too daunting, and I found myself putting away my pocket too and simply enjoying the evening without my camera companion. Once I was well fed, I returned to the SOHO and enjoyed another great night in this room. I admit it was a relief to get out of the heat and back into the air conditioning. I was reflecting last night on how different life is for me depending on the climate. I was thinking how nice it would be to be in a country where the weather is not a constant challenge of oppressive heat or steady rain. I was thinking how nice it would be to be able to go outside effortlessly and without thinking about it and just be cool and dry and comfortable the entire time. Imagine being able to wear jeans. I miss jeans so much. I imagine I will be in that situation at some point in future years. I'm kind of looking forward to that. As for today, I am picturing another wonderful breakfast and a leisurely morning at the SOHO. I plan to time my departure for as close to the noon checkout time as possible, and then I'm hoping for a fast and enjoyable ride over the mountains along Highway 12 back to Moosa. I'm assuming the weather will be okay. With the internet being absent, I have no way to check the weather forecast or do any detailed mapping of my upcoming day's small adventures. All I can do is hope for the best. 7:45 a.m. Well, there does appear to be a pattern to this internet thing at the SOHO. It came back at exactly 7 a.m., just as it did yesterday morning. It doesn't make sense that they would restrict the internet on purpose in this way. It's not like it's a limited resource like water and they have to institute rationing, but the timing is weirdly consistent and specific. We'll see how long it sticks around. The weather outside looks perfect. There's not a rain cloud in sight, and the forecast calls for sunny intervals with a gentle breeze, no mention of rain at all. That's good for my day and my trip back to Moosa. I also wanted to double-check the distance I have to ride today, and I could do that now that the internet is back. According to Google Maps, the Green Guest House in Moosa is 86 kilometers from the SOHO Boutique Hotel in Tak, and the ride by motorcycle will take 1 hour and 51 minutes. I anticipate riding much slower than the average and stopping for at least one cup of coffee at the scenic lookout point, so the journey will take at least 3 hours for me, maybe 4 hours. And that still leaves me plenty of time, even if I leave here at noon. And now that the internet is back, I can access satellite view on Google Maps and look for alternative routes with interesting sights. Already, I just noticed that there is a small road, number 2012, I can take out of Tak instead of taking Highway 12. I can follow this small road to a lake or a water reservoir and then continue through the countryside until I reach Highway 12. That route covers what could be a beautiful stretch of road for 13.5 kilometers. I'll definitely do that. Oddly enough, on the regular Google Maps view, this lake doesn't even appear. It's not shown at all. It only shows up when I switch to satellite view. Unfortunately, after that, there are no more opportunities for taking smaller roads all the way until I reach Moosa. There are 2 places where a small road does branch off, but it just does a loop to the north and then returns to Highway 12 just a short distance ahead of where it started. Those roads would be interesting, I suppose, but they don't actually move my journey along. They would simply be long circular detours that bring me almost right back to where they started. But before rejecting them, I have to scour the landscape on satellite view to look for interesting sights. A couple of national parks sit alongside Highway 12 between here and Mesot. The Taksin Maharat National Park is there. This park contains what could be the largest tree in Thailand. I visited this park last year by scooter, and the other attraction is the Moosa or Mooser Hill Tribes Market. I'm thinking about stopping off there for a while and simply walking through the market. I don't have anything I want or need to buy, but it could be an interesting place to visit. I was doing a bit of reading about the Moosa people. Their name is often spelled Mooser, and they appear to also be called the Lahu. Their history is said to go back at least 4,500 years, and their name means hunter in Burmese. They were known for their hunting skills. They originated in China, but fled from there and settled in all the surrounding countries, including here in Thailand. Wikipedia tells me that there are a total of 1 million Lahu people, and they are found mainly in China, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, the United States, and Vietnam. 100,000 of them are listed as living in Thailand. There appear to be 5 subgroups of Lahu people, and, as appear to be common with hill tribes, one group is distinguished from another by color, usually associated with their style of dress or ornamentation. Therefore, there are red, yellow, black, white, and Lahu Shella. The most populous group in Thailand are the Black Lahu, and I believe the people that live in the area around this market are the Black Lahu. Their traditional costume consists of black and red jackets and shirts for women and baggy green or blue pants for men. When I visited the giant tree in the national park last year, I was joined at the tree by a large and vocal group of teenagers that I believe were Mooser or Lahu. They wore this type of clothing. Well, it is almost 9 in the morning now, and it is time to have breakfast. In fact, now that I have made a rough plan for the day, I will probably pack up and leave a bit earlier than I had planned. With my countryside trip of 13.5 kilometers and a more extended stay at the Hill Tribes Market, I think I'd like to leave a bit earlier than staying right up until noon checkout. Monday, October 11th, 2021. 3:45 a.m. Green Guesthouse, Mesot, Thailand. I don't imagine I will be up and awake for long, but here I am enjoying an early cup of coffee. We will see how long my eyes let me keep them open to stare at this computer screen. The thing is that I woke up around 3 a.m. and my brain started thinking about 10 different things at once, and falling back to sleep became impossible. Instead, I turned on a podcast to perhaps lull me back to sleep. And then this podcast was so fascinating that my brain ended up on fire with thoughts and ideas. I continue to be astonished at how many new things there are to learn. And in this particular podcast, I learned something completely new. It introduced a concept that, until this morning, I had been completely unaware of. The podcast was from 99% Invisible, and the episode was called Corpse, Core, Horse, and Worse. From the name, it was a safe guess for me that it was about the strange and inconsistent spelling in the English language. This, of course, is not a new idea. However, the podcast was based on a book that went in depth into many different reasons behind English having such irregular spelling. And these reasons were generally brand new to me. The book is by Anika Okrent, and it has a very long name. Highly Irregular, Why Tough, Through, and Dough Don't Rhyme, and Other Oddities of the English Language. In the podcast, Roman Mars interviews Anika Okrent, and you can hear just how delighted Roman is with everything that Anika talks about. And I was equally delighted. The book, and therefore the podcast, was jammed with new ideas for me. However, there was one idea in particular that felt brand new. It was something that I don't think I'd ever even remotely heard about. And this idea was that much of the chaos in the English language came about because of the timing of the introduction of the printing press to England. According to Anika, languages routinely go through major changes. The language will reach a point where it will experience a monumental shift. It will enter a period of dramatic change, and this change will continue for a while until the language settles down into its new form, whatever that is. And that would be just fine if this change occurred before the introduction of the printing press or after the introduction of the printing press. Under those circumstances, the language would be etched into its printed form at a time when it was settled and not undergoing dramatic shifts. And this, Anika argued, is why European languages are more consistent and regular in their spelling. They were in a settled form when the printing press appeared. English, however, was in a state of extreme flux just as the printing press was coming into its own. Plus, the man who brought the printing press to England just happened to be using Flemish workers for his press. And as they chose all their letters for the printed books, they were faced with having to choose how words were actually spelt. And with so much change occurring in the English language, the spelling of English got frozen at a time when there was a large amount of variety. English was being transformed and had not yet reached a settled state, and the printing press captured the language at that precise moment, like a snapshot of linguistic chaos. How absolutely true this is, I don't know, but as an idea, I found it captivating. And Anika went on to describe all manner of other ways in which English ended up with such variety in the spelling and pronunciation of words. Nearly everything she said was a new idea to me, and I found the podcast a delight. Yesterday was equally a delight. I already mentioned the wonderful morning I had, and that continued with another wonderful breakfast down at the Awake Owl. I brought my Pocket 2 camera down to breakfast with me, and I spoke to the camera as to a friend and outlined my plans for the coming day. I'm more and more pleased with this camera as I become more familiar with it. I find it to be a pleasant and easygoing companion, particularly in a setting like the Awake Owl. As I explained to my Pocket 2, my discovery of the road through the countryside and my idea to visit the Moosa Hill Tribe's market combined to encourage me to get on the road earlier rather than push things right up until checkout time. My original idea was to relax and lounge around in my room at the SOHO for as long as possible. However, with the thought of some small scooter adventures awaiting me, I decided to simply start packing up right after breakfast and leave whenever I was ready. As it turned out, I took my time with packing, and my methodical approach meant that I still wasn't riding out of the SOHO parking lot until 11:30 a.m. My change in plans hadn't really changed the time of my departure by very much. I ended up leaving perhaps an hour earlier than I would have had I stayed in my room right up until the noon checkout time. Checking out was as equally pleasant and stress-free as checking in. I simply handed in my key card at the front desk. I think the woman might have scanned it on a machine, but that was it. I was free to leave as soon as I handed over the card. There were no formalities at all. They did not hold me there until someone had been dispatched to check the room for damages or missing items. I found my way out of Tack City and onto the small country road quite easily. I had the Relive app running on my Galaxy Note 10 Plus, and I made sure to take pictures from time to time so as to add them to the 3D map later on. My country road took me to the water reservoir I had spotted on Google Maps. This water reservoir was not a very astonishing or even interesting sight, but the route to get there was enjoyable. And the route from there to the main highway was equally pleasant. I ran into just one spot of trouble as a work crew was laying down some new tarmac. Having experienced this on a recent trip to Umpang, I was more aware of the consequences of riding on wet tarmac, and I made sure to ride slowly and aim my scooter's wheels to avoid as much of the wettest tarmac as possible. And as soon as I reached a spot where I could turn off onto an even smaller country road, I did so. I did not want sticky tarmac all over the scooter again. Once I reached the main highway, I gunned the throttle, as much as the throttle on a 125cc scooter can be gunned, and I raced along the highway. Spirits were high. Throughout the day, I had a lot of opportunities for pondering the difference between large motorcycles and a scooter like mine. This was a Sunday, and this highway is a popular route for the local motorcycle enthusiasts to race along on their weekend outings. I was lost in my own sense of speed as I raced along on my scooter, and then I would encounter a group of 10 750cc motorcycles going past me like I was standing still. From their point of view, I was practically a scooter statue, unmoving. To them, I probably seemed a somewhat ridiculous figure. Yet, I reflected that speed was quite a relative concept. The sensation of speed depends entirely on your circumstances. And 60 kilometers an hour on that scooter felt to me like I was approaching the speed of light. It was exhilarating. The scooter's wheels are small and there's next to no suspension, so I felt every bump and irregularity in the road. The engine roared and it shook and vibrated my body. And my helmet was little more than a department store plastic shell, and the wind roared inside it like a mini hurricane surrounding just my head. Those motorcycles had large wheels, sophisticated suspension, and smooth and powerful engines. The riders wore streamlined and sealed racing helmets and skin-tight racing outfits and leather gloves. They raced along the road and carved through the air as if floating. They would have felt nothing of the bumping, crashing, and roaring that I felt. They could be traveling 3 or even 4 times faster than I was, and yet feel not a bump in the road. My point is that even though they were physically traveling at a much greater rate, my sensation of speed might actually have been much more pronounced. It probably goes without saying that I was not suffering in any way from motorcycle envy. I had no desire to ride one of those motorcycles. In fact, even if given the choice, I would reject a 700cc BMW and choose a small scooter instead. I like the scooter as a form of transportation. It suits me. It keeps me more in touch with the world and is more friendly overall. It's so much smaller and lighter and easier to handle and to park. I had ample opportunity to ponder the difference when I stopped for a drink at a scenic lookout point. While I was sipping on my iced green tea, a rather dramatic and exceedingly large BMW motorcycle pulled up at the same place. This BMW was space age and state-of-the-art in every way, and it was adorned with the brightest and most exciting of colors and racing decals. And the two riders, a man at the controls and a woman perched behind, were decked out in identical racing gear. The two of them wore complete matching sets of high-tech riding and racing gear with all the same colors and decals of the motorbike. From head to foot, they looked ready to conquer the racetrack or the farthest reaches of space and time. Joyriders or astronauts. It was kind of hard to tell. They hardly looked human. I'm sure this couple looked at me and my humble scooter with something close to pity, if not scorn. Yet, even given a choice, for a trip like this, or even much longer trips, I would take one of these scooters over a giant and gleaming BMW every time. I guess the humble scooter just jives with my personality better. I couldn't even imagine putting on the kind of clothing that this couple were wearing. I would feel a bit silly. I don't have the personality to carry off a look like that. My visit to the Hill Tribes Market did not turn out as I expected. Based on my reading of the night before, I was expecting much more of a cultural experience. But other than the people looking and dressing a bit different from the majority Thai, the market experience was much like my experience of any market here. The market was full of people selling fruits and vegetables and other agricultural products, but that was about it. There was none of the arts and crafts that I was expecting. I think this area really was quite distinct from the rest of Thailand, but I'd have to spend a fair amount of time there to appreciate it fully. Simply walking through the market didn't feel much different from walking through Mae Sot's regular market. I did, however, take my scooter behind the market and down a mountain road into the nearby village, and life there felt special. I had one funny moment when, quite a distance ahead of me, I spotted a pig lying on its side and a man giving it a good scratching with some kind of implement. Me, being something of a dummy, I honestly had this idea that this pig was getting a delightful scratching with a broom, and it had flopped over onto its side to more fully enjoy it. Of course, as I saw when I got closer, the reality was that the pig had just been slaughtered, and the delightful scratching with a broom was actually a brutal scraping with a metal hoe to tear off the outer layers of skin and hair. And to help with this, a second person was blasting the body of the pig with a flame from a powerful blowtorch. This was all taking place in the middle of the street. From this point, my ride back to Mae Sot kicked into an even higher gear. I had no more thoughts of attractions I wanted to check out, and I simply rode, with the occasional brief stop to take a picture for the Relive app. One interesting aspect is that large sections of this stretch of highway were being repaired, and all the traffic from one side of the divided highway was funneled onto the other side. Therefore, at one point, I suddenly had a bunch of traffic heading right towards me on what I thought was a one-way stretch of highway. For one mad second, I thought I was riding on the wrong side of the road. After some time, the situation flipped, and I was on the other side and myself riding against traffic. That was fun. I arrived back in Mae Sot quite early. In fact, the timestamp on the picture I took in the guest house parking lot is 3:29 p.m. Therefore, my trip from Tac City to Mae Sot had taken exactly 4 hours. And according to my Relive app, I had traveled 96 kilometers. It had been a good, fast day, an enjoyable day.